Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, today's guest is Chris Williams, and he currently serves as the Chief Operating Officer at a company called Interaction Associates. And his background includes more than 10 years in the professional service space, especially around business operations, recruiting, business development, and complex research roles. And prior work includes strategy consulting for Fortune 500 clients. And if you're hearing about Interaction Associates for the first time, they're best known for introducing the concept and practice of group facilitation to the business world way back in the early 70s. And for over 50 years, they've provided thousands of leaders and teams with just practical, simple, and effective programs, tools, and techniques for leading meetings and working better across functions, viewpoints, and geographies. Now, what struck me about that is, yes, it was great doing that in the 70s and incredibly cool, but it's even more important now in this world of hybrid working, distributed teams scattered around the world. So I wanted to learn more about how they've adapted and also the importance of empathy and trust when we're all working from home and how to make people feel engaged and part of a team, part of a company, make them feel important. So many big talking points, so buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to the east coast of the US, where Chris is waiting to share his insights with us. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Hi, Neil. Thanks so much for having me today. My name is Chris Williams. I am the Chief Operating Officer at a company called Interaction Associates. We're a professional services company who help our clients with building leadership, meeting management, and collaboration skills. Our company DNA is all around collaboration, or giving people the mindset and skill set to work better together. Our organization has our own proprietary intellectual property that helps leaders see the world through process eyes or a process lens. And we've been around for about 51 years, including working with many of the major technology firms.
Wow, 51 years. That's incredible. And I think while the tech industry's teams have seamlessly evolved into remote and hybrid work operations right now, I think what's still missing when it comes to how companies operate is how cohesive cultural units work together in this disrupted fashion. And it's very hard. We've got a lot of employees now that have been recruited online, onboarded online, but some have not even met their colleagues. But what do you think's missing here, and what's the best way around this?
As many of your listeners probably know, remote work or hybrid work is really the de facto normal. Yeah. 58% of the U.S. workforce now has the opportunity to work remotely or from home when possible, and we know that's even higher in the tech industry. One of my beliefs is that our level of trust and empathy for each other is at really a low point. If you look at the level of quits that are going on across all industries and how people relate or don't relate to each other on just common issues, everything has become really, really polarized. So there's a couple elements that I see that are really missing. Number one is the quality of connection that you have with coworkers. Connection with coworkers is really done primarily from a remote fashion in two ways. The first is asynchronously, through technologies such as email or Slack or Microsoft Teams, where somebody is sending a message to somebody and then waiting some point of time and hopefully receiving a corresponding message back. And then the second way is really those live interactions that either happen on Microsoft Teams or Zoom in some sort of meeting. And so my belief is that the quality of those connections and the use of time really can have a major effect on how effective and efficient people are within their role and really how they feel connected to the organization. If you are a new employee at a technology company and you are not onboarded well and you do not have an opportunity to meet your team, that can be a very isolating feeling for somebody. And over time, that employee, if they're not really integrated into the organization and the cultural fabric of the team or the company, you can see that impact by just retention rates and people leaving. So I've spoken with many technology leaders who mention to me frequently that it's very common that they are in 20 to 40 meetings per week. And you think about that, as somebody moves up an organization, typically they are in more and more meetings each week. And so if those meetings are not well run, if there's low level of trust on how people interact or empathy, that really can show up in the effectiveness or the lack of effectiveness in that person's time. And what happens is really people schedule more meetings, which is kind of the hilarious thing. It's a vicious cycle because they didn't get what they wanted accomplished. They have to essentially meet more and more. And I think the pandemic has really shown us that remote work is possible, but there are challenges to that. Physical distance, we know from research, shows that lower levels of trust is a byproduct being physically apart. And so one of the things that organizations really have to do and take a proactive approach on is how are you building connections among your team members, specifically those virtual team members. There's some data that shows that 65% of employees who switched to remote work felt less connected to their colleagues. And this is especially true for new hires.
And another topic I wanted to bring up with you today is the effect that so much polarization and division has on the workplace. So I don't think we tackle it enough. And I think it's obviously not helped and maybe even enhanced by the amount of doom scrolling we all do when we're spoon-fed the constant stream of bad news when scrolling down our smartphone. So the question I'm going to ask is, what does trust and empathy look like, especially in today's world with the effects of the ongoing pandemic, war, inflation, political polarization, and overall global events that are just increasing that everyday stress for every team member and the company that they work for? So it's frightening just reading it all out there, isn't it? But what kind of effects have you seen?
I think trust is one of those interesting elements where when it's there, it's not really noticeable. But when it's lacking, it's very clear by everybody that there's low level of trust. So my perspective is that trust primarily shows up in relationships and how people relate to each other. It's often easier to see trust when it's there and when it's strong. And when trust is high, employees typically believe three things. Number one, they believe that the leaders that they're working for are credible. Number two, they believe that they, as an employee, are treated with respect as a professional. And number three, they believe the workplace is fundamentally fair. So I see this from an impact perspective, really on how organizations are approaching and addressing their employees, particularly in this challenge now about where people are working. You know, are people going to continue to work remotely? Are they going to come into the office full time? Or is there going to be some sort of hybrid fashion or blend where some days are in the office and some days are remote? And I think that that really shows up in how different organizations particularly have handled this situation. So just to give you a few examples, Neil, SAP, the technology company, has a program that they rolled out called Pledge to Flex. And this is essentially a trust-based approach to how they're trusting their employees to work. And so with this Pledge to Flex, they're essentially location agnostic. They're basically telling their employees, we don't care where you work. It's 100% flexible. So it's up to you to set your schedule, to figure out, where you're going to work and when you're going to work. And this has a really big impact, particularly on new graduates and maybe women in the workforce that really value that flexible work environment. And it really just helps them with their retention and also recruitment of new employees.
And before you came on the podcast today, I was doing a bit of research on you, and I read something great about your belief on why seeking understanding first and foremost among team members and individuals is actually key to creating empathy. Is that something you can expand on?
Yeah, great question, Neil. If you look at just the world today, I think it's really easy to see that there's an us versus them mentality that people fall into. You can take any political issue, climate change, abortion, gun control, and there's really two sides to those issues. And so people tend to fall into one camp or another. And so the trap of this thinking is that when you believe that, you believe there's an other group, it's really hard to actually understand what that group is believing, because you don't really relate to them. And the byproduct is you really have low empathy for those individuals. And this shows up in the workforce, I think, on a daily occurrence for many, many people. Emails, as an example. very easily to be misunderstood. Tone is very challenging to read on an email. And so that's a problem. I think when you think about technology, particularly things like Slack or Microsoft Teams, there's often a lapse or a gap in communication. It may take somebody a few hours to get back to you. And that can cause anxiety for people. People are really wondering, like, is this person like hearing me? Do they understand what I'm saying? And so as humans, we tend to be conscious and sometimes unconscious of the filters that we use. And so we tend to not seek understanding. And that's really a detriment to building trust and empathy. Being empathetic is really all about the ability to perceive and relate to others. It doesn't mean that I agree with somebody. It's really about, can I adopt or can I imagine what that person is going through? So empathy is really a precursor to trust. And you can't build empathy without first understanding where someone comes from. And so listening and asking questions and really recognizing where that person's coming from is a big priority. And that really is a key element.
So within a business setting, for any business leader listening today, how do they define trust and empathy in a tech company today? And do you think more leaders should prioritize these elements as mission critical elements to their senior management teams?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think trust really shows up in two ways. There's practical trust, which is, are you meeting your commitments? Are you dependable as a team player? There's also emotional trust. How do we treat each other with respect? Do we have an employee or colleague's back? Is our emotional intelligence really where it should be? And empathy, as I mentioned previously, is really the ability to perceive and relate to each other. And so this shows up in a couple of ways. And so one way I'll describe this or convey this is, what do employees want in their leaders? And then conversely, what do leaders typically want in their employees? So I'll start off with what employees typically want for their leaders. Employees want to be asked for input on decisions that affect me. And this often is a key element that's missing. Most employees are not frequently being asked on their input from things. And so that creates low levels of trust. Number two is they want background information. So, how is the decision being made? Like, tell me how you came to your decision as a leader. Employees want to be set up for success, particularly with learning and development opportunities and also resources. They also want leaders to admit their mistakes. So if you're a leader and you make a mistake, one great way to build trust is actually to just own your mistake and say, hey, I messed up. Like, I hope you can forgive me. And the final one is not to punish people for raising issues. If it's a safety issue or a quality issue, it's really interesting because when you look at Japanese work culture, the people that raise their hand on the production line and say there's a mistake, they actually get rewarded. They get rewarded for actually raising those issues. So that's what I would say, how trust shows up from what employees want in leaders. And then conversely, what do leaders want from in employees? First thing that leaders typically say is they want to be updated on the status of work not yet completed. I've been a leader, and I will say that there's times where if I'm not updated or not clear about the work or the work progress, my mind tends to wander. And those thoughts aren't necessarily accurate, but that's just kind of our human nature where we go. The other thing is that we really want our team members to give improvements, make suggestions. People these days are paid to think. They're paid to think. They're paid to use their mind. They're paid to work together. And so my belief is there's no better opportunity in an organization to gradually improve themselves over time than it can be to really unleash the power of your employees to bring suggestions to the table, new product innovations, new process innovations, new ways that you could do things differently. And that can really do a lot to build trust and build empathy.
And is there anything that tech leaders can do to take concrete steps in building trust and empathy in the workplace, especially when they have distributed teams and they're managing everything remotely?
The common approach I see people take is to think, what can the employee do differently? But really, it should be the other way around. It can be, what can myself as the leader? It really has to start with you at a personal level. How can you change? How can you be more trustworthy? So there's certain behaviors that leaders can employ that really help to build trust and empathy in a workplace. One of them is keeping your agreements. So don't agree to something that's not feasible. That's the first thing I would say. Making sure that, the commitments that you're conveying and the decisions you're making, that you really are kind of consistent with how you speak and how you show up. The next thing I would say would be sharing responsibility. Most employees want to perform in their workplace, but when they're not given additional responsibility or they're not asked for their ideas, that can contribute to lower levels of trust because the employee is not given the opportunity to contribute. So as a leader, one of the best things you can do is think through, how can I have my team members really contribute? How can I have them share responsibility? It's not all on the leader to get the job done. It's really about the leader's job to catalyze the team. I think the other thing that sometimes is missed when it comes to building trust and empathy in a workplace is really around accountability. And I think that people often can miss accountability. They think that holding someone accountability makes you look like the bad guy or the leader that's kind of, strict. And the opposite is actually true. So really, to build a trusting workplace and to hold people accountable can really elevate a team, because the team sees that the leader is consistent across everything they say and do. And it's not about calling out one person. It's really about holding the entire team accountable.
And I'm curious, for anyone that follows this advice, what are some of the outcomes that a company can expect when they're prioritizing these efforts? Because they're going to want to, you can only improve what you can measure. So what kind of improvement should they see?
Yeah, great question. There's been a lot of research that's been done, particularly around trust and how companies that have higher levels of trust really do have greater performance. One of the examples I'll give is Great Places to Work Institute here in the United States. They've done a lot of research on this, and their research has shown that for organizations that have high trust, there's 2 to 3 times the gain in stock price versus those organizations that don't have that same level of trust. The other interesting statistic is turnover rates. Turnover rates are 50% lower in those higher trust organizations versus industry competitors. So that's a huge one, particularly in the tech industry, where we see a lot of transitory nature between employees. One way to really retain your employees and keep your employees is to really build out trust. I think the last one is really around innovation. How can you involve people in your organization? How can you engage them? That increases engagement from employees. It increases agility on how fast a team can get a product to marketplace. And it really just gives confidence that the organization they're working for is a great place to work. There's the chairman of JetBlue Airline, Joel Peterson. He's another big voice in around trust in the business world. So in 2016, Peterson published a book titled The 10 Laws of Trust, Building the Bonds That Make Business Great. And so in writing that book, one of the things that Peterson was asked was, why trust? And so this is what he said about trust. Quote, because it works most of the time. Not only do people accomplish more in a collaborative spirit when seeking win-win outcomes than when setting up paranoia, but they're simply much happier when dealing with a world of harmony and cooperation. So that just goes to show there that there's really, really strong business outcomes for focusing on increasing trust and really empathy in the workplace.
And as this is a tech podcast, another question I wanted to ask and explore with you today is, what sort of technology and technology protocols can come into play, and how does it get in the way, or should I say, how can it impact building trust and empathy, and what can be done to optimize technology to make and sustain connections for teams versus disrupting them?
Yeah, it's a great question, Neil. I'm a big believer that technology is really a tool. It's a tool to facilitate great work, great ideas, great information. And so trust is really built upon clear understanding, agreement, and keeping your word. So one of the things I recommend that all leaders do from a process perspective is sit down with their team and get clear on how you're using technology to communicate. So if you have a distributed team and people are in different locations around the world, really get clear, like, when are you using email? When do you use asynchronous technologies such as Slack or Teams or instant messaging? When is it time to actually pick up the phone and actually call people? And the other thing I would say would be, as a leader, finding technology that can help track projects project updates and action items, and have a system that the team agrees to. Like, this is how we're going to hold ourselves accountable as a team. This is how we're going to convey transparently, like, where things are. There's tons of different products in the marketplace. I'm really agnostic to what those products are, but I would say just choose one that works for your team. Choose one, be consistent, and make sure people are aligned. The other technology I would say that team members really can leverage, and we've seen this since the pandemic began, is video conferencing technology. There's been a lot of research in this, particularly an individual named Nicholas Bloom, who's a professor of economics at Stanford University. He's done a lot of research around remote work and hybrid work. And one of the things that Nicholas Bloom found was that research has shown that video conferencing technology enables virtual meetings to be just as effective as in-person meetings when you have a small number of individuals, say 2 to 3 people, where everybody can be seen on webcam. You can notice facial expressions. So turning webcam on, being able to make that emotional connection, that's really, really critical for also sustaining trust, because it's much easier to trust somebody when you see someone and you can relate to them and you can empathize with them than it is if your webcam's off or you're just not connecting with that person live.
And just to bring us home, what are some tangible next steps that you would suggest a company leader take in order to help their tech teams connect with each other more meaningfully, and overall, as a company and their culture, foster trust and empathy? Is there anything that you'd love anyone listening just to walk away with today? Any key messages?
Yeah, great question, Neil. I think there's 3 things that leaders can do to help teams connect with each other and really foster that trust and empathy. The first is to create alignment among the team. So as a leader, share the big picture with your people. Like, where are you currently? Where are you aiming to go? And how do you get there? Let people understand how their particular role fits in with the bigger picture. Number 2 is thinking about building capability among your team. So when it comes to your team members, what does each person need on your team? What's the growth opportunity in that person? And how can you as a leader really delegate and set clear direction? And this is a tricky one for most leaders, because it's really a balance between giving someone the right amount of direction and right amount of clarity to take on that stretch assignment and do it successfully, but at the same time, as a leader, not micromanaging. So I'm a big believer in giving people very clear performance expectations. What does excellent look like? And then getting out of the way and letting that person perform. And then finally, I would say increasing predictability. So how can you build agreement and understanding with each other? And so agreement building is really the currency that we would say of collaboration. I think it's also really critical for trust. And so the more you can build these small working agreements around your process, around your protocol, around how you're connecting live is really important. Technology is really powerful. And I think one of the things we have to keep in mind is that there's a human element. Behind all that technology, there's a worker who's a human who is an emotional being. And so finding ways for that person to connect one-on-one with their manager every week or 2, connecting with the bigger team live, those things I don't really believe can be replaced by some sort of technology or app. You really have to focus on the live connection, and that really elevates the team to the next level.
Well, you've already shared so much gold with us today. I'm going to put a bit of pressure on you and ask us to leave us with one more bit of gold, and that is a book that has inspired you, or a song that helps you get your head in the zone that equally inspires you, and we'll add it to our Spotify playlist or Amazon wish list. Is there anything you'd like to leave us with? And I'll add it to one of those lists.
Yeah, great question, Neil. So there's a book I've started reading recently. I really believe every leader should read the book. It's called Quiet Leadership. So Quiet Leadership was written by David Rock. And the main point of the book is that people are these days, particularly in the knowledge worker environment, are really being paid to think. And so as a leader, your primary responsibility is how do you improve the performance of your people simply by helping that employee shift their thinking. So the book is all about asking questions of your people to create new wiring in their brains. Let your people do the thinking, focus on solutions, asking people questions such as, what are you going to do about it, or what ideas do you have, versus you as a leader telling people what to do. It's much more of a coaching mentality as a leader and how you can show up. So that's what I would recommend to your listeners.
Awesome. Well, I'll get that added straight to our Amazon wish list. And before I let you go, for anyone that would like to dig a little deeper on the kind of work that you're doing at Interaction Associates, and also explore the topics we've talked about today in more detail, what's the best starting point for everything?
Yeah, absolutely. So the best way is to go to our website, which is interactionassociates.com. And that's the best way really to get in touch.
Awesome. Well, I've loved chatting with you today. And I think we've covered so much in a short amount of time, but you delivered so much gold and so many big takeaways for any business leader to make a real difference. But more than anything, just thank you for sitting down and sharing that with me today, and also leaving us all with a great book to check out too. Thanks again.
Great. Thanks so much for having me, Neil.
As I said earlier in the podcast, there's so much polarization and division in society now, and it's not helped and maybe even enhanced when doom scrolling our way through stories around the pandemic, the war, inflation, political polarization and global events. What impact and what stress is that causing team members in the workplace every single day? Food for thought indeed. And I think, as Chris said there, trust and empathy, that is a great step forward. But I'm interested in how you and your organisation are navigating around these very global issues in every single workplace. As always, please share them with me. techblogwriteroutlook.com, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn at Neil C. Hughes. Neither me or today's guest have all the answers. Some of them you're going to have, and I want you to share them with me. And we'll get your insight shared on this website too. So whether that be in an email, a DM, or as a guest on this podcast, whichever's easiest for you. I'm more than happy to accommodate whichever works best for you. So have a think, send those emails in to techblogwriteroutlook.com or catch me on socials, and we'll keep this conversation going. But I've taken up far too much time of yours already today. I don't want to be that guy hanging around at a party just that little bit too long. So I'm going to get out of here, and I'll join you again tomorrow with another guest. So thank you for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.